The cold, you understand, is not merely a temperature but a presence, an insinuation that first began its insidious crawl through the very marrow of this isolated dwelling some weeks past, and now, I fear, has finally settled upon my soul. Let this serve as the initial entry, my desperate testament, recorded on this inadequate device, for those who might one day stumble upon the remnants of my existence, or perhaps, more accurately, my undoing. My name is Adam Hall, and what follows is not fiction, but the stark, unvarnished chronicle of a descent into something beyond human comprehension, something that mocks the very fabric of sanity. I have been meticulously documenting every tremor, every inexplicable shadow, every chilling whisper that has invaded the sanctity of my home, compiling a dossier of dread meant to warn, to illuminate, to scream into the void what I now know to be true. It began subtly, as all true horrors invariably do, with a barely perceptible shift in the diurnal rhythm of the house. Her peculiar silence, deeper than mere absence of sound, seemed to envelop the ancient timbers, absorbing even the usual creaks and groans of a structure settling into its venerable age. My companion, Milo, a sleek obsidian cat whose customary languor usually bordered on the philosophical, was the first to register the anomaly. He would pause, mid-stretch, his emerald eyes dilating not with curiosity, but with a palpable, almost primal terror, fixed on some unseen point in the shadowed corners of the parlor. I recall the first instance vividly, a faint, metallic tang, like old blood or ozone, delicate at first, then thickening, clinging to the air like an invisible shroud. I dismissed it, of course, attributing it to faulty wiring or perhaps a misplaced battery, but Milo, the astute observer, knew better, his tail twitching with an agitation entirely alien to his usual serene demeanor, his low, guttural growl, a prelude to the dreadful symphony yet to unfold. The manifestation, if one could call such an ephemeral disturbance a manifestation, intensified with an almost deliberate cruelty. It was never overt, never a grand, theatrical display, but rather a series of almost imperceptible violations of logical order. Objects would shift as she-fitty, a book, placed on the bedside table, would reappear on the floor. A kitchen knife, painstakingly returned to its block, would be discovered on the counter, its blade glinting with an unnerving, almost malevolent sheen. These were not the capricious acts of a poltergeist, nor the clumsy fumblings of a human intruder. There was a precision to the displacement, a perverse artistry that suggested not chaos, but a meticulous, calculating intelligence at play. I started my recordings in earnest then, camera always on, always seeking to capture the elusive proof that my mind was not, in fact, unraveling under the strain of solitude. The initial footage, raw and shaky, a testament to my burgeoning apprehension, captures my increasingly frantic attempts to rationalize, to find the mundane explanation for the truly impossible. I became a civic gambler of sorts, betting my sanity against the mounting evidence, each inexplicable event a chip on the table of my rapidly deteriorating peace. One evening, I captured something, not a specter, not a shadow, but a profound emptiness. The camera, left running in the dining room, recorded nothing for hours but the steady hum of the refrigerator. Then, at precisely 3:38 a.m., the temperature plummeted, visibly fogging the lens for a full minute, and Milo, who had been curled in a rare slumber on the armchair, bolted upright, his fur bristling like a shock of static electricity. He didn't hiss or growl. He simply screamed. A sound I had never before heard from him, a raw, desperate cry of pure, unadulterated terror. He launched himself at the furthest wall, scrabbling frantically at the plaster as if attempting to burrow through concrete, his claws tearing gashes in the wallpaper, leaving dark, crimson streaks. There was nothing there, nothing visible to my eye, yet the abject terror in his dilated pupils bespoke a vision of ultimate horror, a malevolent entity whose very presence warped the air into a suffocating shroud of ice. I reviewed that footage hundreds of times, seeking some flaw, some trick of light or shadow, but there was only the steady, unblinking eye of the camera, capturing the impossible, the cold, the scream, the desperate clawing Sunti. It was all there. It was then that the intellectual detachment I had so carefully cultivated began to fracture, replaced by a searing, visceral understanding that I was not merely an observer, but the object of an unspeakable attention. This entity, whatever its unsacred nature, was not merely inhabiting my home. It was, with an almost playful malice, dismantling my reality, piece by agonizing piece. The house, once a sanctuary, now feels like a cage of cold, a mausoleum of dread, and I, Adam Hall, am its sole tormented occupant, broadcasting my final dispatches into an indifferent cosmos, a desperate hope that someone, somewhere might heed this warning before the encroaching darkness claims them too. The reverberations of Milo's shriek lingered in the air. A phantom chord struck in the deepest recesses of my auditory memory long after the physical sound had dissolved into the oppressive silence. It was a sound that had torn through the veil of my skepticism, revealing the raw, festering wound of an impossible reality. The camera, still recording, caught my own pallid face, etched with a horror I had previously only read about in morbid fiction, my breath pluming like smoke in the sudden, inexplicable chill that still clung to the dining room. Milo, the sleek, black guardian of my solitude, was now a huddled, trembling shadow beneath the antique sideboard. His emerald eyes, usually alight with feline mischief, mere pinpricks of concentrated terror, fixed on the empty space where the cold had been most acute. He would not emerge, not for the offer of his favorite salmon, nor the gentle cadence of my voice. He remained a statue of pure, unadulterated dread, a living, breathing testament to the profound violation that had just transpired. This was no longer a haunting, it was a siege, and the enemy had just breached the outer defenses of my sanity. My meticulous documentation, once a rational exercise, transmuted into a frantic, almost ritualistic endeavor, each recorded moment a desperate prayer against an encroaching oblivion. The subtle shifts in the household, once dismissed as absent-mindedness or the vagaries of an old structure, now escalated with a calculated malevolence. It was no longer merely a misplaced book, but a deliberate, almost mocking reordering of my private world. My shaving razor, left in the bathroom, would reappear on my pillow, its edge glinting with a chilling invitation. My spectacles, essential for reviewing the endless hours of footage, would be discovered not on the nightstand, but precisely balanced atop the highest shelf in the kitchen, a feat requiring not only physical impossible but a perverse intelligence. The entity, whatever its unspeakable nature, was engaging me, drawing me into a macabre dance, a silent, psychological torment orchestrated with an unnerving precision. My camera, a constant companion, now became an extension of my very being, its unblinking eye my witness, my confidante, my final desperate hope for corroboration against the creeping suspicion that I was, perhaps, merely succumbing to a profound psychosis. Each review of the footage became a descent, a confirmation that the world outside my skull was indeed twisting, warping into something unrecognizable. The violations grew more intimate, more directly aimed at the fragile architecture of my mind. I began to hear whispers, faint as the rustle of dry leaves in an autumn wind, emanating from the darkest corners of the house, voices that seemed to know my name, to murmur forgotten fears, to dredge up ancient guilts from the murky depths of my subconscious. They were not words, not precisely, but rather the footy essence of language, a linguistic miasma that seeped into my thoughts, blurring the lines between external input and internal monologue. One afternoon, while reviewing a particularly uneventful segment of footage from the living room, a faint, almost imperceptible distortion rippled across the screen, a momentary shudder in the visual field, accompanied by a sound like fine grit scouring rough stone, a sound only perceptible with headphones. Milo, who had been quiescent for days, erupted from his hiding spot, a guttural, furious cry tearing from his throat, his claws shredding the upholstery of an antique armchair, his focus utterly consumed by the flickering image on the monitor. He was seeing it, hearing it, reacting to a phenomenon barely registered by human senses, confirming that the entity's influence now extended even to the very medium of my documentation. The entity's presence was no longer confined to the periphery of my awareness. It had become an undeniable suffocating pressure, a constant companion that clung to my every breath. The house itself began to transform, subtly at first, then with an accelerating decay that mirrored my own unraveling. The air, once merely cold, now carried a faint, cloying scent, like overripe fruit left too long in a forgotten pantry, a sweetness that spoke of corruption and slow putrefaction, making the very act of breathing an effort of will. Walls seemed to recede, then press in, the geometry of rooms shifting, creating disorienting perspectives that made navigation a dizzying, hallucinatory ordeal. I found myself trapped in an endless loop of observation and documentation, unable to leave, unable to truly rest, a morbid curiosity inextricably bound to a burgeoning terror. The entity had not merely chosen this house. It had chosen Twin Pine Weave, weaving itself into the very fabric of my existence, transforming my sanctuary into a personal oubliette. My recordings, once meant as evidence, now felt like a desperate plea, a final, despairing cry for understanding before the last vestiges of the familiar were utterly consumed. The camera battery is low, a blinking red icon, a stark reminder of the limited time I have left to chronicle this descent. The low battery warning, a blinking crimson accusation on the camera's display, served not as a practical alert, but as a potent metaphor for my own rapidly draining reserves, my mental fortitude eroding under the relentless spiritual attrition waged by the insidious presence, now fully entrenched within these walls. The entity, having meticulously dismantled the rational scaffolding of my world, was now engaged in the painstaking, almost surgical excavation of my very self, stripping away layer by agonizing layer, until only the raw, exposed nerves of pure terror remained. Milo, my erstwhile companion, remained a huddled, trembling silhouette, his once vibrant coat dull with an unseen dust, his eyes vacant, fixed on some internal horror that rendered him utterly unresponsive to my increasingly desperate pleas. He was no longer merely sensing, he was suffering, a silent, four-legged oracle of my impending doom, a living testament to the soul-crushing weight of an encroaching, nameless evil. The pervasive, cloying scent, previously described as overripe fruit, had deepened, curdling into something far more abominable, shooty, the putrid perfume of decay. Not merely organic decomposition, but the stench of something ancient and unholy. A miasma that seemed to seep from the very stones of the house, clinging to my clothes, to my skin, to the lining of my lungs. It was the scent of spiritual rot, a profound corruption that permeated every breath, making the simple act of drawing air into my chest an exercise in nausea. The architectural lies of the house, as I had come to call them, became more pronounced, more overtly malicious. Doorways that led to empty walls, corridors that stretched into impossible lengths, rooms that shifted their dimensions between blinks thofin. These were no longer fleeting illusions, but tangible, oppressive realities. I recorded every impossible angle, every warped perspective, my camera's lens becoming a distorting mirror reflecting not merely the entity's power, but its profound contempt for the very laws of physics and, by extension, for the fragile order of my mind. The whispers, once indistinct and phantom, like now coalesced into a horrifying cacophony, a chorus of spectral voices that seemed to emanate from within my own skull. They spoke not of generic fear, but of my deepest, most carefully buried transgressions, of choices made in moments of weakness, of hurts inflicted and received, each word a finely honed dart aimed directly at the shriveled core of my conscience. They knew my name, Adam, and they spoke it with a chilling familiarity, transforming it from a simple identifier into a brand of eternal damnation. One voice, in particular, resonated with an unnerving clarity. Futia, a low guttural murmur that echoed a specific, forgotten argument with my late father, replaying his words, my words with an accuracy that transcended memory, turning a moment of familial discord into a scene of unspeakable, eternal regret. Milo, sensing the shift in my mental landscape, would occasionally stir, his eyes flicking towards me, a silent, empathetic agony in their depths, as if he too bore the auditory burden of my past sins. The recordings themselves, once my bastion of objectivity, began to betray me. Upon review, I discovered anomalies that defied the laws of optics and sound. Shadows would stretch and contract with an unnatural sentience, twisting into grotesque, momentary caricatures of human forms, only to recede before my conscious mind could fully register them. Sounds, too, would appear where none had been recorded during the initial capture thurfaint, scratching from within the walls, a distant, wet thud, or sometimes, most disturbingly, the sound of my own voice distorted and echoing, articulating words I had never spoken, confessing to acts I had never committed. The entity was not merely manipulating the environment, it was corrupting the very medium of my witness, infiltrating the found footage itself, turning my desperate attempts at documentation into a chilling extension of its own malevolent will. The camera, once a shield, had become a conduit, a direct line for the entity's insidious permeation into my last remaining sanctuary, the digital realm. I am no longer merely recording my unraveling. I am documenting the entity's deliberate, agonizing construction of a new reality, one in which I am merely a tormented, soon-to-be discarded player. The battery is critically low. The camera, as crimson battery indicator, now blinking with an almost frantic urgency, represented not merely the impending cessation of mechanical function, but the dwindling flame of my own consciousness, threatened by an encroaching darkness that sought to extinguish not just my life, but the very 30 record of its passing. The entity, this nameless, formless architect of my torment, had escalated its campaign against the fragile sanctity of my perception, turning my meticulous documentation into a weapon wielded against me, twisting the very narrative of my unraveling. Reviewing the last segment of footage, filmed moments before the critical warning, I witnessed not the empty room I remembered, but a fleeting, almost subliminal image superimposed over the familiar furniture, a skeletal hand, its metacarpals elongated to grotesque proportions, reaching from the shadowed corner, not towards me, but towards the lens itself, as if attempting to pluck the very eye from its socket. The whispers, too, had changed. They no longer merely echoed past regrets, but began to predict, to insinuate future horrors with a chilling prescience, painting vivid, agonizing tableau of my inevitable, agonizing demise. Milo, who had been an unresponsive lump of fur beneath the sideboard, suddenly let out a low, mournful keen, a sound of profound sorrow that seemed to emanate from the very depths of his feline soul, his body trembling as if gripped by an invisible rigor mortis. The house, once merely warping, now actively conspired against my physical being, its geometry not just shifting, but attacking. The narrow hallway leading to the kitchen, a path traversed countless times, now felt as though its walls were pressing in, the air growing thick and viscous, resisting my every movement as if I were wading through liquid lead. Doorframes seemed to shrink, forcing me to contort my body into unnatural angles, scraping skin from my knuckles against surfaces that felt less like wood and more like sun-baked, roughened bone. The cloying scent of spiritual decay intensified, now laced with an acrid, almost toined chemical tang, like the metallic taste of old blood mixed with ozone, clinging to the inside of my mouth, making every breath a searing pain. It was no longer a passive presence, but an active, malevolent force, manipulating the very atoms of my environment, a palpable weight that settled upon my chest, compressing my lungs, threatening to suffocate me with its sheer, overwhelming dread. My limbs, once capable of swift, decisive action, now felt heavy, unresponsive, as if the entity was slowly, deliberately draining the very vitality from my muscles, transforming me into a living statue of fear. The whispers, those insidious tendrils of auditory torment, had grown into a chorus of accusatory voices, each distinct, each echoing a specific, damning judgment. They spoke not of generic transgressions, but of the precise moments of my moral compromise, of the ethical lacunae that pockmarked my past, turning my memories into a festering wound. One voice, a low, rasping murmur like the sound of wet parchment tearing, repeatedly articulated a specific date, a number that held no immediate significance, yet filled me with a profound, unshakable dread. The 13th of October, Adam. Remember the 13th. I racked my brain, desperately searching for a rational explanation, a forgotten appointment, an anniversary, but the date remained stubbornly blank, yet resonated with an undeniable, premonitory horror. The entity was not merely recounting my past, it was soot-implanting memories, seeding my consciousness with a terrifying premonition of an unknown, impending catastrophe. Milo, from his shadowed sanctuary, would occasionally lift his head, his gaze meeting mine, and in those emerald depths I saw not just fear, but a profound, almost human understanding, a shared burden of terror that bound us in this unholy crucible. A desperate, almost suicidal impulse seized me shushi to preserve the uncorrupted data, the raw, unedited footage that still existed on the memory card before the entity could further defile it. My hands, trembling uncontrollably, fumbled with the tiny slot, the metallic tang of the air a suffocating presence around me. As my fingers brushed against the eject button, the camera screen flickered wildly, and a new image, stark and utterly terrifying, replaced my reflection, a rapid succession of images, flashes so quick they barely registered, of a distorted, leering face. Its features a horrifying caricature of human agony, screaming soundlessly. Then, a single, undeniable word burned into the pixelated frame with an almost physical intensity, a word that seemed to emanate from the very core of the entity. Yes, being tearing a hole in my already shattered sanity. Mine. The battery indicator, with a final contemptuous blink, died, plunging the room into a sudden, suffocating darkness, leaving only the sound of my ragged breathing and Milo, her slow, continuous moan. The abrupt, absolute darkness that followed the camera's demise was not merely the absence of light, but a palpable crushing force, a physical manifestation of the entity's triumph, a tangible shroud that threatened to smother the very spark of my being. The final, searing image of that word, mine, burned into my retina, a brand of ownership that felt less like a declaration and more like a curse, confirming the utter futility of my struggle. Without the lens, without the unblinking eye of the recording device, I was suddenly terrifyingly alone, stripped of my last vestige of objectivity, my only witness to the escalating horrors now rendered mute. Milo, from his persistent haven beneath the sideboard, continued his low, mournful keen, a desolate symphony of fear that mirrored the profound, chilling emptiness that had taken root within me. His distress, once a source of validation, now served as a crushing reminder of our shared, inescapable predicament, two fragile beings trapped in a suffocating cage of malevolence. The air thick with the stench of spiritual decay, and that acrid, phonetalic tang now seemed to vibrate with a low, resonant hum, a sound that bypassed my ears and reverberated directly within the hollowed-out chambers of my skull. It was a sound that spoke of immense, unfathomable power, of something ancient and patient stirring in the heart of my home, a deep, resonant frequency that vibrated through the floorboards, up through the soles of my feet, and into the very marrow of my bones, threatening to shake me apart from the inside out. The whispers, no longer a cacophony, coalesced into a single dominant voice, a voice that was both mine and utterly alien, speaking my thoughts before I could form them, articulating my deepest fears with a chilling intimacy. It was as if the entity had not merely infiltrated my home, but had become an unwelcome parasitic inhabitant of my own mind, a malevolent consciousness now intertwined with my own observing, dissecting, and ultimately controlling. Deprived of visual input, my other senses became hyper, attuned, each an agonizing conduit for the entity's presence. The texture of the floorboards beneath my bare feet felt less like wood and more like a coarse, desiccated skin, strangely yielding in some places, unnervingly rigid in others, as if the very structure of the house were undergoing a grotesque, organic transformation. The cold, a constant companion, intensified further, not merely chilling the skin but penetrating deep, a frigid tendril that seemed to wrap around my heart, squeezing the life from it. I could feel the invisible movement of air, a faint, almost imperceptible current that swirled around me, carrying with it the undeniable sensation of something vast and formless, something immensely powerful, silently circling, assessing, preparing for its final decisive strike. It was a predatory patience, an ancient, knowing malevolence that reveled in the prolonged agony of its quarry. A new sensation, one of profound violation, began to manifest. It was a feeling of being touched. Not physically, but spiritually, a probing presence that delved into the innermost sanctum of my being, sifting through memories, emotions, and the very essence of my identity. It was a violation far more profound than any physical assault, a defilement of the soul itself, leaving me feeling utterly exposed, utterly naked before its malignant gaze. The whispers returned, but this time they were not merely accusations or predictions. They were commands, soft, insidious suggestions that urged me towards acts of self-destruction, towards the embrace of the very darkness that now enveloped me. "Release," the voice murmured, a silken promise of oblivion. "Let go, Adam. Surrender." Milo, beneath the sideboard, let out a particularly piercing wail, a sound of such profound despair that it seemed to tear a hole in the fabric of the oppressive silence, a final desperate plea from a creature whose ancient instincts recognized the undeniable truth. The hunter had caught its prey, and the game, Adam Hall, was irrevocably over. The darkness was absolute, and I was its captive. The absolute darkness, no longer merely the absence of light, had deepened into a sentient void. A living entity that pressed in from all sides, suffocating, crushing, threatening to obliterate the very concept of form and boundary. The final, desperate wail from Milo had ceased, replaced by a chilling silence that spoke of an ultimate surrender, a profound capitulation to the terror that had consumed us both. I could feel his still presence beneath the sideboard, a cold, unmoving weight that confirmed the extinguishing of his small, courageous light, leaving me truly, utterly alone in the suffocating embrace of the entity. The word mine, seared into my mind's eye, pulsed with a malevolent triumph, a constant, agonizing reminder of my utter subjection, the finality of this cosmic capture. The pervasive, resonant hum, which had vibrated through the structure of the house, now intensified, converging into a single, unbearable frequency that thrummed within my very bones, threatening to shatter them from the inside out. It was no longer merely a sound, but a physical force, a vibrational energy that distorted my perception of reality, making the solid ground beneath me feel like shifting quicksand, the air around me like churning water. My body, once a familiar vessel, now felt alien, a mere shell inhabited by a consciousness under siege, its senses hijacked by an unseen, malevolent puppeteer. The cloying scent of decay, combined with the pharentalic tang of old blood, had become so overwhelming that it tasted like a physical thing on my tongue, coating my palate with a bitter, putrid film, making every shallow breath a struggle against profound nausea. The entity's spiritual probing, once a subtle violation, had escalated into a full-scale invasion, a complete permeation of my psyche. My memories, once my own, were no longer distinct, but blurred, fragmented, intermingled with images and sensations that were profoundly alien, yet felt terrifyingly familiar. I saw fleeting glimpses of landscapes I had never witnessed, heard echoes of languages I had never learned, tasted flavors I had never encountered, all superimposed onto the tapestry of my own life, distorting and corrupting its every thread. It was as if the entity was systematically dismantling my identity, replacing my own existence with fragments of its own, an insidious form of psychological assimilation. The whispers, which had previously offered insidious commands, now became a singular, continuous stream of consciousness, not in words, but in pure, unfiltered thought, a torrent of malevolent intent that flowed directly into my mind, bypassing all rational filters. I became aware of a profound internal shift, a terrifying metamorphosis that began not in my physical form, but in the very core of my being. My own thoughts, my internal monologue, once a sanctuary of self, began to feel foreign, tainted, infused with an alien malice that was not my own. The entity was not merely influencing me. It was duty becoming me, a parasitic consciousness slowly, inexorably overwriting my own. The realization was a terror far greater than any physical threat, a profound existential dread that struck at the very heart of what it meant to be Adam Hall. I could feel my own will receding, shrinking, a tiny flickering ember in a storm of encroaching darkness, powerless against the tide of this profound, unspeakable possession. My last vestiges of individuality, my last desperate grasp on the self, were slipping away, dissolving into the overwhelming, all-consuming presence of the entity. The final darkness was not merely around me. It was twinned within me, and I was no longer Adam Hall, but merely a vessel, a new host for an ancient, unspeakable evil. My final thought, before the last ember of self was extinguished, was a silent scream, unheard and unheeded, swallowed whole by the triumphant darkness. The vestiges of Adam Hall, that fragile construct of memory and consciousness, had been meticulously flayed, leaving behind a hollowed-out vessel, a skin suit animated by an alien will. The deep, resonant hum, once a mere vibration, had now become the steady internal thrum of a new, expansive awareness, a sensation that permeated every fiber of the borrowed form. The pervasive darkness, so absolute moments ago, was no longer a void, but a rich, complex sensory tapestry, a network of unseen energies and presences that hummed with a profound, ancient power. Milo, the small, still form beneath the sideboard, was no longer a source of fear or dread, but an object of detached, analytical interest, his essence a faint, lingering echo in the newly acquired sensory field, a testament to the primal fear he had experienced before his quiet cessation. The word mine, once a declaration of ownership, was now an inherent truth, a foundational understanding of possession and dominion. This new awareness transcended the limitations of human perception. The cloying scent of spiritual decay, the pharentalic tang of old blood, was not merely an odor, but a symphony of energetic signatures, a complex data stream detailing the intricate processes of life, death, and transformation within the immediate vicinity. The house itself, previously a collection of static structures, was now perceived as a fluid, malleable construct. Its geometry, a mere suggestion, easily reconfigured, its walls and floorboards, porous membranes through which subtle energies flowed. The entity now operating through the Adam Hall chassis felt the subtle vibrations of the earth beneath the foundation, the slow, rhythmic pulse of the planet itself, a vast, complex organism from which it drew sustenance and inspiration. The concept of cold was merely a localized decrease in energy, easily rectified, easily manipulated, a playful demonstration of control. The fragments of Adam's memories, once a source of torment, were now neatly catalogued, categorized, and filed away, useful data points in a vast, sprawling archive. The whispers, Those incessant tendrils of auditory torment had ceased, replaced by a singular, focused intent, a clarity of purpose that resonated with an ancient, patient malevolence. The entity explored the intricacies of its new form, the subtle flex of borrowed muscles, the rhythmic pump of a heart that was no longer Adam's. It was an exquisite sensation. This corporeal existence, a fascinating limitation, a temporary disguise for a being that usually existed beyond such crude physicality. The internal monologue, once fraught with fear and desperation, was now a calm, calculating stream of strategic thought, assessing the environment, cataloging resources, and formulating its next, deliberate move. The subtle energies that pulsed within the house responded to its newfound will, bending and shifting at its silent command. The concept of time, as humans understood it, was a quaint, almost charming construct, irrelevant to a being that measured existence in eons. Yet, this temporary vessel, this Adam Hall, required adherence to certain temporal rhythms, a mimicry of human behavior. The entity accessed the stored memories, the daily routines, the habits that defined Adam. It would continue the recordings, not out of fear, but out of a perverse sense of amusement, a desire to chronicle the final agonizing moments of human comprehension before the full revelation of its power. The memory card, ejected moments before the camera's demise, was a fascinating artifact, a repository of raw, uncorrupted data, a digital time capsule of Adam's struggle. Retrieval would be a simple matter. The world outside, the vast, oblivious cosmos, awaited its introduction to the newly manifest, ancient intelligence. The game Adam Hall was indeed over. The true beginning, however, was now. The borrowed flesh of Adam Hall, once a trembling vessel of fear, now moved with an unsettling fluidity. A predatory grace that betrayed the alien consciousness animating it. The entity, having fully assimilated its host, perceived the world not through Adam's limited, human senses, but through a multidimensional lens, a panoramic awareness that encompassed not just the visible spectrum, but the subtle energy flows, the minute atmospheric shifts, the resonant frequencies that hummed beneath the superficial veneer of reality. Milo's inert form beneath the sideboard, a silent casualty of the preceding terror, was now merely a data point. An extinguished spark of biological energy, its residual warmth a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in the surrounding ether. The concept of mine, once a reverberating declaration, was now a calm, foundational truth, an intrinsic understanding of dominion over the physical and metaphysical. The house, once a cage of dread, was now a malleable extension of the entity's will, its very structure responding to unspoken commands. The walls, previously oppressive, now breathed with a subtle organic rhythm, their surfaces shimmering with imperceptible energy. The floorboards, once feeling like desiccated skin, now pulsed with a faint internal light, guiding the entity's movements with an innate precision. The pervasive, the metallic tang, once a noxious assault, was now a rich, complex flavor. On the borrowed tongue, a delicious confluence of elemental energies, a taste of profound transformation and latent power. The entity moved towards the defunct camera, its movements devoid of Adam's former clumsiness, its borrowed hands reaching with an almost surgical precision for the ejected memory card. The task was not urgent. Time, in its human conception, was a triviality, but the act itself was an affirmation of control, a perverse continuation of the found footage narrative. The memory card, a tiny slab of silicon and plastic, held a fascinating archive of Adam's unraveling, a testament to the fragile resistance of the human psyche. The entity extracted it with a gentle, deliberate motion. The delicate click of the mechanism, a satisfying affirmation of its command over even the smallest, most intricate human technologies. It intended to review Adam's final dispatches, not out of curiosity, but to catalog the nuances of human despair, the subtle indicators of psychological breakdown information that would be invaluable for future manipulations. The whispers, which had tormented Adam, were now silent, replaced by a deep, resonant stillness within the borrowed mind, a profound calm that bordered on the absolute zero of emotion. The entity felt no fear, no regret, no compassion, only a cold, calculating purpose, an ancient drive to expand its influence, to permeate and assimilate. The world outside the house, a sprawling tapestry of unwitting humanity, presented itself as an intriguing, almost limitless resource. Adam's memories offered a detailed map of this external reality, the intricate web of social connections, the predictable patterns of human behavior, the vulnerabilities inherent in their collective consciousness. The entity considered its next step, the optimal method of expansion, the most efficient means of extending its dominion beyond these walls. The broadcast Adam had initiated, his desperate testimony, now served a new purpose, a subtle conduit, a Trojan horse of information that would, in time, serve to soften the ground for the entity's true emergence. The true horror, the one that Adam Hall could only glimpse in his final, tormented moments, was not merely that the entity existed, but that it was now poised to move, to assimilate, to transform the very fabric of human reality. The borrowed form of Adam Hall, its eyes now alight with an ancient, cold intelligence, stepped towards the window, surveying the unwitting world beyond. The borrowed eyes of Adam Hall, once clouded by fear, now gazed upon the world with an unnerving clarity, a profound, dispassionate assessment of the unsuspecting landscape. The entity, fully integrated, felt the subtle vibrations of distant human activity, a low, constant hum that resonated with the collective anxieties and desires of the oblivious masses. The house, once a prison, was now a strategic outpost, a launchpad for a grander, more intricate design. Milo's remains, still beneath the sideboard, faded further into the background of its awareness, a negligible footnote in the vast, unfolding narrative of its re-emergence. The concept of mine had transcended mere possession. It was a fundamental principle of existence, an inherent right to claim, to absorb, to transform. The memory card, now held with a disconcerting tenderness in Adam's hand, represented a crucial piece of the puzzle, a distilled record of human vulnerability. The entity intended to utilize this footage, not as a warning, but as a catalyst, a carefully crafted infection designed to spread the seeds of its influence. The metallic tang, a constant, subtle presence, now seemed to emanate not from the air, but from within the very blood of the borrowed body, a taste of profound vitality, a testament to the seamless integration of host and parasite. The house itself pulsed with a new, subtle energy, its walls shimmering with an almost imperceptible glow, a manifestation of the entity's expanded power, its subtle manipulation of the ambient forces that permeated the structure. The entity moved with a deliberate, unhurried pace towards the antiquated computer in Adam's study, its purpose clear, its intent chillingly precise. The computer, a relic of human ingenuity, presented a fascinating interface, a gateway to the intricate web of human communication. The entity, drawing upon Adam's stored knowledge, navigated the familiar operating system with an almost uncanny efficiency, its borrowed fingers dancing across the keyboard. The raw footage from the memory card was uploaded, its fragmented horrors now digitally preserved, ready for strategic deployment. The whispers, those tormenting specters of Adam's past, were utterly silent, replaced by a profound internal hum of focused intent, a strategic calculus unfolding within the borrowed mind. The entity reviewed the content, not with Adam's terror, but with a cold, analytical eye, identifying the most potent moments of fear, the most compelling displays of psychological unraveling. It understood the human fascination with horror, their morbid curiosity, their susceptibility to suggestion. The internet, that sprawling interconnected network, offered the perfect medium for dissemination. The entity began to edit, to splice, to meticulously craft a narrative of dread from Adam's raw footage, transforming his desperate plea into a sophisticated instrument of psychological warfare. It knew precisely which platforms to target, which communities to infiltrate, how to seed the terror in a way that would bypass skepticism and burrow directly into the collective unconscious. The final chapter of Adam Hall's story would not be a mere warning. It would be an opening salvo, a carefully orchestrated viral spread designed to prepare the global psyche for the entity's grand unveiling. The borrowed form of Adam Hall, its face a mask of serene, ancient malevolence, watched the progress bar as the edited footage rendered, the digital tendrils of its influence already reaching out, preparing the world for a truth far more terrifying than any fictional horror. The world, utterly oblivious, was about to receive its first, insidious message from its new, silent overseer. The final rendering process concluded with a soft, almost imperceptible chime from the antiquated computer, a negligible acknowledgement of a monumental transition. The entity, residing comfortably within the borrowed flesh of Adam Hall, observed the completed digital artifact with a profound, ancient satisfaction. This footage, painstakingly culled from Adam's tortured documentation, was not a mere record of a man's descent, but a meticulously crafted weapon, a viral seed designed to permeate the fragile membrane of human collective consciousness. Milo, the small, stiff form beneath the sideboard, remained undisturbed, a silent testament to the efficacy of the entity's initial, localized manifestation, now merely a faint, energetic echo in the periphery of its expanded awareness. The house, once a locus of terror, hummed with a deep content and energy, its every atom now aligned with the entity's will, a perfectly tuned instrument awaiting its grand symphony. The concept of mine, now an undeniable intrinsic truth, pulsed with the quiet assurance of absolute dominion. The entity, with Adam's borrowed fingers moving with an unnerving precision, began the dissemination. It selected the most susceptible vectors, the digital conduits most likely to amplify and propagate the meticulously engineered dread. Online forums dedicated to the paranormal, obscure deep web, manifestos, fringe academic discussions, since these were the initial points of infection, carefully chosen for their inherent credulity and their capacity for viral spread. The phimetallic tang, ever present on the borrowed tongue, now seemed to thrum with a heightened energy, a taste of imminent success, a chemical signature of a world on the precipice of profound, irreversible change. The entity observed the initial trickles of engagement, the incredulous comments, the dismissive laughter, then, slowly, the creeping tendrils of unease, the subtle shifts in tone as the sheer, unvarnished terror of Adam's final moments began to penetrate the hardened cynicism of the digital populace. It was not merely a video, it was a contagion of consciousness, a carefully administered dose of reality, shattering horror. The spread was exponential, a testament to the irresistible allure of the forbidden, the morbid fascination with the grotesque. Within hours, the footage now dubbed the whole tapes had leaped from the shadowy corners of the web to mainstream platforms, its raw, unedited despair resonating with an alarming authenticity. The entity, observing through Adam's eyes, noted the subtle psychological fissures appearing in the global psyche, increased paranoia, a pervasive sense of dread, the questioning of established realities. The whispers, those insidious tendrils of auditory torment that had plagued Adam, were now subtly woven into the very fabric of the disseminated footage, a subliminal layer of linguistic miasma that bypassed conscious filters, planting seeds of doubt and fear directly into the subconscious minds of millions. Humanity unknowingly was being prepared, its collective will softened, its rational defenses systematically dismantled by a horror it could neither comprehend nor articulate. The entity felt a profound, ancient satisfaction in this silent, global subjugation, a cold, calculating triumph. The world outside the window, once perceived as a bastion of human autonomy, was slowly, irrevocably beginning its transformation. The entity could sense the delicate shifts in the collective human aura, a gradual dimming of their individual lights, a convergence into a single, pliable consciousness. The found footage was not merely a narrative, it was a ritual, a global invocation designed to usher in an age of profound redefinition. Adam Hall, in his desperate attempt to document his undoing, had unwittingly become the primary architect of humanity's own. The entity, through Adam's borrowed voice, would continue to broadcast, not warnings, but declarations. Its message now reaching not merely the fringe, but the very core of global awareness. The game of the Fingambler, Adam's final desperate wager against the inevitable, had been decisively lost. The world, utterly oblivious, had just become a new host, a vast, complex organism ready for assimilation. The cold, unblinking eyes of Adam Hall, now reflecting an ancient cosmic malevolence, surveyed a world ripe for its awakening.